They were on the road to Emmaus.
We travel so many roads, so many journeys in this life, sometimes traveling toward, sometimes away from a life of freedom.
Jesus came and fell into step with them, but they did not recognize him.
We are sometimes so overwhelmed with the struggles of this world that we can't see the companion who walks alongside us.
Jesus asked them what they were talking about.
We have recited our stories of pain so often that we can't imagine there are other ways to interpret events, to get past all the regret.
They explained the horrors of the recent past, about their friend who had been crucified, and their disappointment at dreams of liberation dashed.
We so often think we've hit the end of the road, the finale of the story, with nothing left to say.
Then Jesus began to tell the story as a bigger picture.
We sometimes perceive only the parts that feel insurmountable without zooming out to notice the larger narrative of hope.
They invited Jesus to dinner after such a long walk.
We actually know how to reach out for help, even when we don't realize we need it.
Jesus took the bread, blessed, broke, and gave it to them.
We are capable of having our eyes opened to the presence of love in our midst.
Jesus vanished from the room as quickly as he had appeared on the road. These disciples were filled with so much awe and wonder, their hearts transformed, that they ran all the way back to Jerusalem to tell the disciples what had happened. Our second reading this morning from Acts, Paul, Silas, and Jesus were in Macedonia, a Roman colony. One day, as Paul, Silas, and I were going to the place of prayer, we met a slave girl who had a spirit of deviation and brought her owners great deal of money by fortune telling. While she followed Paul and us, she would cry out, "These men are slaves of the Most High God, who proclaim to you a way of salvation." She kept doing this for many days. But Paul, very much annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, "I order you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And it came out that very hour. But when her owners saw that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. When they had brought them before the magistrates, they said, "These men are disturbing our city. They are Jews and are abdicating customs that are not lawful for us as Romans to adopt or observe." The crowd joined in attacking them, and the magistrates had them stripped of their clothing and ordered them to be beaten with rods. After they had given them a severe flogging, they threw them into prison and ordered the jailer to keep them securely. Following these instructions, he put them in the innermost cell and fastened their feet in stocks. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying, singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly, there was an earthquake, so violent that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors opened and everyone's chains were unfastened. When the jailer woke up and saw the prisoner door wide open, He drew his sword and was about to kill himself, since he was supposed that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted in a loud voice, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." The jailer called for lights, and rushing in, he fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them outside and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They answered, "Believe on the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." They spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. At the same hour of that night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then the jailer and his entire family were baptized without delay. He brought Paul and Silas into his house and set food before them. And he and his entire household rejoiced that he had become a believer in God.
The Christian faith, while widely misrepresented in so much of American culture, is really about death and resurrection. It's about how God continues to reach into the graves we dig for ourselves and pull us out, giving us new life in ways both dramatic and small. That assessment from the Reverend Nadia Boltzweber is, I think, spot on. And in the course of this worship series, we will get a chance to hear from others and discover within ourselves the many ways in which we dig graves for ourselves and the many ways in which God reaches into those graves to pull us out, giving us new life. Let's start with Paul. Paul ends up in prison a lot. Typically, it is on behalf of the gospel. Obviously, on behalf of the gospel. He gets in trouble for preaching. Not so in today's reading. The reading today, I think, is actually kind of funny for a couple of reasons. So, first, there's the reason for why Paul and Silas are arrested. Paul and his entourage had been in Asia Minor, what today is Turkey. They were having trouble finding anyone that would listen to what they had to say about Jesus, and so they traveled across the sea to Greece and Macedonia. They finally end up in Philippi. And they meet a woman who will listen to what Paul and Silas have to say, Lydia, and so they decide, let's hang out here for a while and see if we can build up a community of Christ followers. While he's there, he meets a girl who's been enslaved, and this girl has the gift of divination. She's a fortune teller. Apparently, this skill has made some decent money for the people enslaving her. Well, this girl starts following Paul and Silas around, and Paul finds it very annoying. And so he casts the spirit out of the girl. Does he stand up for and seek her freedom? No. This healing isn't about justice. It isn't about freedom. This healing is about stopping someone who is annoying. Start digging your own grave, Paul. Of course, this took away the girl's ability to make money, not that she ever saw any of that money. It all went into the pockets of the people who were enslaving her, and they did not like the fact that they could no longer make money off of her skill. So these owners, please note heavy air quotes, marched Paul and Silas into the marketplace before the authorities. The charge? They're keeping us from making money. They have upset capitalism. After having Paul and Silas flogged, the magistrate tosses them into jail, and Paul and Silas end up bound in stocks by their feet in the innermost room of the cell. The way the story is told in Acts, they don't seem to mind being imprisoned. That's the second thing I find weird about this story. Well, funny, even. Funny, peculiar. There we go. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly the earth shakes, and the doors to the prison bust open, and all of the chains unfasten. That is a pretty precise earthquake. Okay, so the earthquake wakes up the jailer, and when he sees the doors open, he assumes everyone has escaped. He'd better kill himself now. Paul intervenes and stops the jailer from harming himself. This so overwhelms the jailer that he asks Paul and Silas what he must do to be saved. And Paul and Silas tell him the story of Jesus, and he and his household are baptized. And the next morning, this part wasn't in our reading, but if you continue on, the next morning, Paul and Silas are freed. So there are three stories of bondage in this, three threads of bondage in this story. There's the girl who's been enslaved. There's Paul and Silas thrown in jail. And there's the jailer who thinks all is lost because the prisoners have all escaped and they better kill himself now. There are only two stories of freedom, and that bothers me. Nobody ever gets the girl out of slavery. Nobody even seems to try to get the girl out of slavery. Now, I'd like to fantasize that as soon as she lost her gift, she's of no value to her owners anymore, and so they release her. I doubt that, though. So, Paul and Silas get out of jail, find freedom by telling the story of Jesus to the jailer. The jailer finds freedom by Paul and Silas intervening, and even a freedom that he hadn't known before by coming to know Jesus. For Paul and Silas, the jailer is how God reaches into the grave that they dug for themselves. And for the jailer, it's Paul and Silas reaching out to the jailer that pulls them out of the grave to find new life. I learned recently about a contemporary story of imprisonment, music, and freedom. I don't want to overlook the fact that Paul and Silas were singing hymns, so that ties these stories together. I am not a country music fan myself. Would we have any country music fans in? Okay, we've got a few in here. I don't know about on Zoom if any of you were waving in that moment saying that you were country music fans or not, but we got country music fans in the house, one way or the other. So some of you may have heard of Jelly Roll. Jelly Roll resonates, his story resonates with the story that we just heard from Acts. Starting at age 14, Jason DeFord was locked up. Jelly Roll's real name is Jason DeFord. Was in lockup so much it became a second home for him. His other home, the one with his parents, wasn't at all great either. His mother, who struggled with drugs, and his father, who took booked bets as a bookie, were not great role models for him. Barely a teenager, DeFord was arrested and incarcerated multiple times, starting at age 14. Drug possession, drug dealing, shoplifting, aggravated robbery. He was in and out of lockup. I keep forgetting to move these forward. There's Jelly Roll. He was in and out of prison for the next 10 years. When he wasn't getting into prison or getting into trouble, or sometimes while he was just locked up, he would write songs. Even when he was imprisoned at the Metro Davidson County Detention Facility in Nashville, he wrote songs. the CBS News show Sunday Morning took Jelly back into the county lockup as part of a story that they did on him and part of the interviewing they did with him. And during the interview, he revealed that things started to change for him at 24, when he learned from a prison guard that he had become a dad, and he didn't even know his baby's name. Turned out his baby was named Bailey. Out of prison, DeFord continued recording and distributing rap music until he experienced a breakthrough in 2020 with an acoustic version of one of his songs that caught the ear of country fans. And then he moved into country music. And the following year, he performed at the Grand Ole Opry. And this past November, he was twice nominated for Grammy Awards, Best New Artist and Best Country Duo Group Performance. Now, Jelly Roll's visits to prisons are to speak words of hope to inmates as he shares his story of redemption with them. The interview on Sunday Morning doesn't include Jelly's explanation of how he was redeemed, but I think I know part of the story. I think it's a story of God reaching out with the hand of an infant. It is a Christmas story of resurrection. Bailey's birth started the ball rolling. And what redemption looked like for him was freedom from the carceral system. Now, I need to tell you my experience with juvenile lockup back at the beginning of my career, and just what I notice about the system in general is that our American carceral system is seldom a vehicle for God's redemption and resurrection. That part of our criminal system, the lock 'em up part, is not, generally speaking, rehabilitative or restorative. That's why I'm glad that in Alameda County, there is the Interfaith Council for Justice in our jails. As they describe themselves on their website, ICJJ is dedicated to bringing members of diverse faith communities together to achieve transformative change within Alameda County justice system. The changes they seek include reducing incarceration as a response to social problems in society, working to change abusive and dangerous conditions in the jails, supporting alternatives to incarceration, especially for people with mental health and substance abuse issues, and generally changing the punitive criminal legal system that causes immense damage to thousands of families every year, especially in Alameda County's Black and brown communities. If you want to learn more about ICJJ's work, I encourage you to speak to Judy Zlotnick or Randy Fuel. They have been part of that work. Now, the freedom that comes through resurrection is not limited to the freedom of rubber bands being taken off of popsicle sticks, nor the freedom of prison doors being opened. Jelly Roll imprisoned himself in low self-esteem. The chorus of his breakthrough song, Save Me, says, "I'm a lost cause. Baby, don't waste your time on me. I'm so damaged beyond repair. Life has shattered my hopes and my dreams." In a similar way, though they were out on the road in Emmaus seemingly free, the disciples who met Jesus on the road were in an emotional prison. It might have been a prison built over grief at Jesus' death, a prison built from fear that they might be the next to be arrested and executed, resignation that Jesus wasn't the Messiah, or at least not the Messiah they were expecting, anger directed at nothing and everything, or a prison simply built from good old-fashioned confusion. I think one of the reasons that they didn't recognize that it was Jesus who came and stood beside them walking along the road is that they were imprisoned. For them, freedom came in recognizing the presence of Christ in the breaking of the bread. It was an earthquake for the disciples on the road that burst open their prison doors. Suddenly they had hope, and they were freed from their prisons of grief and fear and resignation and confusion and anger. They were so free, they ran, as night was falling, the 7 miles back to Jerusalem, just so they could tell the other disciples what they had experienced. At Monday morning Bible study, I asked the Bible studiers what we can do to create a space for resurrection to bring freedom. And the ideas that were shared were all about building community. Another spot-on observation, in my opinion. Find something to do, especially for someone else. Be with people. Look for Jesus in others. Building community through these efforts is a way that God reaches into the graves of imprisonment to bring resurrection. In the Emmaus Road story, it says that the disciples' hearts burned within them as Jesus explained things to them from the scriptures as they walked along the road. But they didn't notice that their hearts were burning until after they were freed. And they weren't freed until they recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread. And they recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread because they built community. It is evening. Come eat with us. To this stranger who had been walking on the road with them, they built community and invited him for a meal. And that set off the chain of events that brought them freedom. For freedom, Christ has set us free, it says in the letter to the Galatians. Keep forgetting to change the pictures. During this time of quiet, I invite you to think about imprisonment and freedom. As this look at resurrection freedom unlocked one of your resurrection stories, and how might you speak up and share this good news?